So I wanted to open today with a quick show of hands. How many of you have read or had read to you The Giving Tree? How many of you already knew the book? All right. So The Giving Tree is a children's classic. It was written by Shel Silverstein and first published in 1964 by Harper's. It had a very small first printing, less than 7,000 copies. After all, the book had been rejected by multiple publishers and was not expected to be a success. It was too odd for a children's story, a little too sad. Today it has sold over 10 million copies and been translated into multiple languages and been read by almost all of you fine people. Now, show of hands, how many of you were made to feel happy or warm and fuzzy by The Giving Tree? How many find it to be a positive or a happy story? Okay. How many of you find it to be sad or troubling? How many of you are made angry by it? The Giving Tree is one of the most divisive books in all of children's literature. The book became an early hit with Protestant ministers, and in this interpretation of the story, The Giving Tree is a book which teaches the Christian ideal of selfless love. The tree gives for the joy of seeing others made happy, asking for nothing for itself in return, but it is made happy through the simple act of selfless giving, of charitas. And the tree is willing to give completely of itself. Some interpret the book as being about the relationship between ourselves and God. The tree as God is seen as the source of all good things to humanity, providing the person with everything he needs throughout his life, from childhood through adulthood, through his elder years, including, in the end, his final resting place, his welcome home to peace and companionship. In an ecological interpretation, the tree is Mother Nature. And again, the message is that everything we have is a gift of the natural world, and the appropriate response is gratitude. A writer on a blog called The Pioneer Woman shares the assessment of many when she writes, "The Giving Tree is one of the most beautiful stories ever written, and one of the most painfully symbolic." She says it can mean many things depending on your age and stage in life, but the overarching theme is unconditional love, the 100% kind of love, the kind that requires or demands nothing in return, the spiritual kind of love that transcends circumstances or behavior, the kind of love that never, ever goes away. She says, "It is the one book on earth that I absolutely cannot read without crying." To put it mildly, not everyone shares this positive assessment of the book. If we're going to read The Giving Tree as a story about Mother Nature and humanity, then it is difficult for the modern reader not to see it through the lens of ecological abuse and destruction. Ecology was not on the tip of everyone's tongue in 1964 when The Giving Tree was written. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring had just been written 2 years earlier. The modern environmental movement was in its infancy. Dr. Seuss's environmental cautionary tale, The Lorax, would not be written until 1971. But today we see the boy take and take to satisfy his need for more and more material things, and it is startlingly obvious that he takes without any regard for the ecological health of the tree, which is the source of his good things. So is that picture of the young man creeping off with all of the branches loaded up in his arms not a little chilling in the face of our modern predicament, or the bare stump left in the wake of his incessant taking? If we want to read the tree as God, or the Spirit of life, or the fount of all blessings, then this can also become a parable about wrong desire, about the alienation of the spirit. After all, the boy is happy when he is with the tree. Without a doubt, he is happy, he is free, he is boundlessly creative, he is loved, and he loves in return. But he trades this precious connection to the source of life. He trades his connection to loving spirit for all the trappings of a thoroughly conventional life. And each choice takes him progressively further away from that life-giving source. Now, no matter how many times he says no, the Spirit is still there, inviting him back, always waiting, always welcoming him, always urging him to embrace joy and renewal. But each time he chooses again to deny the Spirit. And each time he returns, he is sadder and more broken than the time he was before. In the end, the most he can receive is rest. What could have been, the book challenges us to ask, if he had chosen joy instead? And if we're going to read this as a story about unconditional love, well, in America, I think it is fair to say the story of the tree and the boy is most often seen as a metaphor for the relationship between a mother and her child. Surely it is not coincidental that the tree is immediately identified as she and has the position of the adult in the relationship. The tree shelters and provides, nurtures and teaches, and loves and loves and loves boundlessly. And some see the giving tree as a deeply touching portrayal of a mother's unconditional, unfailing, and steadfast love. Far and away, the most common criticism of the book focuses on the unhealthiness of this relationship between the tree and the boy. UU minister, the Reverend Victoria Weinstein, calls the giving tree Shel Silverstein's classic tale of a masochistic, codependent relationship. In this criticism, the boy is narcissistic and selfish, taking and taking with no regard for the other, and the mother gives and gives with no regard for her own self. After each encounter with the boy, who despite growing to adulthood remains perpetually a child, after each encounter, the mother is left diminished. There is literally less of her than there was before. The narrator blandly assures us that she is happy, just so happy to see you, although you never write and you never call, just so happy to give you whatever you need, even though you are literally taking all of me. Just so happy sitting here being a stump. Until even the narrator has to call her out on that one. Some people see in the story a projection of Silverstein's own fears of parenting. In 1962, he was on record as saying he didn't want children. Perhaps we see in the book a young man's fear that to parent is to be consumed. He did eventually have 2 children. But surely at times, motherhood feels like both selflessly giving with overflowing, inexhaustible love, and like being pulled apart by needs that never seem to end. If we can hold the complexity of both of these things, the giving tree might serve as a sort of confessional, like a field manual to the joys and agonies of motherhood, although of course it was written by a childless young man. But if presented as a how-to manual for new mothers or new parents, as it so often is, right? You become a mother and copies of this book just start flooding to you, then we have to ask, what is wrong with this picture? Phyllis Fogelman, the editor who worked with Silverstein on The Giving Tree, admitted in a 1999 interview that she had some qualms about her role in the publication of this book. Shel Silverstein himself had only this to say about the book: it's about a boy and a tree. Adding, it has a pretty sad ending. I see The Giving Tree as a deceptively simple story that can be mined for any number of rich, complex spiritual themes. I do appreciate the book. Ironically enough, though, I think the worst reading of the book is the one that on the surface it invites, that this is a story about the beauty of giving. It is certainly a story about demanding. It is a story about taking. Is the tree good at giving? She's willing enough. She gives to make the boy happy, so the narrator says, but the boy does not, in fact, at any turn in the story, grow happy, despite the magnitude of her giving, nor does he mature. Her own vision of the boy is curiously frozen in time as well. She does not acknowledge his growth. She does not expect growth. He is always just the boy. He takes without boundaries, She gives without boundaries. How different the story might have turned out if the tree at any point had simply said, no. No, you cannot have my trunk. We're entering the season of giving, and also a time of heightened family togetherness, which sometimes leads to heightened family dynamics. So for the rest of this sermon, in the spirit of the giving tree, I wanted to reflect on some of the ways in which giving can go awry, and how that which begins in love and generosity can become unhealthy for the giver, and sometimes for the givee as well. To begin, giving which violates our boundaries often starts out small. The boy in the story doesn't start by asking the tree for her trunk. He asks for money, and she offers him some apples as well, something that she can easily replace. He then takes all of the apples, every last one. This might have been a warning sign to her. But requests for giving often start small like this, and they build up over time until we can find ourselves giving beyond our healthy limits. So just because we said yes in the past does not mean we cannot say no today if we have healthy boundaries on our giving. Oftentimes we feel that we need a reason to say no, especially in the face of pressures brought to bear by a parent, by a group of siblings, or by a well-orchestrated and coordinated persuasion campaign on the part of the children. You know how it is when they team up on you. It is as if unless we can come up with a good reason for saying no, the default answer should be yes. But as the saying goes, no is a complete sentence. You are not obligated to explain or justify your personal boundaries. And sometimes no is based on a gut feeling that you will only be able to explain with words later, if at all. It is okay when we have boundaries to trust our instincts and to trust that we truly know our boundaries. The boy in the story is allowed to define the problem to be solved. He needs money to buy things. He needs a house to be married. He needs an escape from his problems. Does he need any of these things? He surely thinks that he does. But again, nothing in the story appears to truly promote the boy's welfare or his happiness. Perhaps what the boy truly needed was to discover what he truly needed. We don't need to accept someone else's definition of a problem and take it on as our own to be solved. Nor do we need to accept someone else's framing of a solution. The boy wants to literally sail away from his failures, like literally in a canoe, sail away from his failures. Perhaps the boy's problem was a lack of imagination in dealing with his problems. We are not given any information about the nature of his troubles in the story. Neither does the tree know. But if the tree had been called the listening tree instead of the giving tree, maybe the boy would have talked his way to some more creative solutions, or a deeper sense of self-compassion, or an acceptance of his responsibility and accountability. Sometimes wisdom and growth comes from not having our needs met, at least not in the way that we imagine. Now, the boy feels the urgency of his own needs, right? Of course, some needs truly are urgent. Unexpected crises happen. So part of generosity is being generous with our attention and our understanding that sometimes other people's priorities need to become our priorities. But not every need or want is a crisis, and we do not need to take on other people's sense of urgency by default. We live in an age of instant gratification where everything is expected to happen very quickly. So, the other day, Suzanne and I were in a restaurant with Suzanne's parents for breakfast, and we were celebrating Suzanne's parents' 56th anniversary. They were reminiscing about the early 1960s, which is when they got married. And by chance, a song was playing in the background from that era. We were trying to talk, do you know this song? What is this song? So, no problem. My wife, Suzanne, has an app on her phone. You hold the phone in the air, it listens to what is playing in the background, filters out all of the extraneous noise and chatter, and tells you immediately the name of the song and the artist, and then it gives you a link where you can instantly buy it. The song was The Chains by the Cookies, if you're interested. It was from 1962. At the same time, I was able to pull up on my phone a complete history of the band The Cookies. Did you know many of the original members of The Cookies went on to be in the Raylettes? Now you know. The point is, our need was satisfied in about 15 seconds. And what I have noted in my own self and my own behavior is that now indeed a website has about 15 seconds to give me the information that I want before I start to feel impatient, indignant even, right? Like 30 seconds would be just ridiculous. 30 seconds to get the complete text of every work of Plato? Are you kidding me? Ridiculous. 30 seconds to tell me what the Spice Girls are up to now? Or who invented the Teletubbies? Or for like the millionth time, what is Brexit? Unacceptable, totally unacceptable. And I grew up with card catalogs, right? The World Wide Web for me was my local library branch. But now you have 15 seconds. We live in an age of instant access, instant gratification, and heightened anxiety. So we should be at least initially suspicious of anyone's sense of urgency, including our own. And finally, I want to mention that our own internalized, self-imposed pressures to give that can lead us to give in an unhealthy way, right? We have these internalized pressures. Family dynamics are complex. They carve out roles for people within the family system, and these roles can be very hard to shake. For example, we may have internalized the role of the good child who takes care of everyone, or the responsible sibling, right? Eldest siblings are particularly susceptible to taking on the role of the responsible sibling. We may have survivor's guilt if we escaped from a difficult family situation that not everyone escaped from, take on our responsibility to solve everyone else's problems. Women may have had the role of the giving mother modeled for them in ways that reinforce this idea that the good mother meets everyone's needs before her own, or that the good daughter puts the parents' needs above herself. When we've internalized these pressures, these roles, giving starts to come from a place of self-justification rather than from generosity. Giving of ourselves can become the means by which we earn love or justify our right to exist. And since as human beings we need love and we need to feel our worth, our right to exist, when these things are tied to our willingness to give, we can be pulled into unhealthy patterns of giving, into giving that exhausts rather than celebrates our energy and our abundance. Author Parker Palmer, in a slightly different context, talks about our need to justify ourselves with our productivity, with our work, but giving can take the same dynamic, right? We find our justification in our doing rather than our being. The same principle applies to giving. We find our justification in our ability to meet other people's needs, in our ability to make other people happy, in our ability to solve all of these problems around us. So in our reading, the poem Camas Lilies, UU Minister Lynn Unger writes, "Consider the lilies of the field, the blue banks of Camas opening into acres of sky along the road. Would the longing to lie down and be washed by that beauty abate if you knew their usefulness? How the natives ground their bulbs for flour, how the settlers' hogs uprooted them, grunting in gleeful oblivion as the flowers fell. And you," she says, "what of your rushed and useful life? Imagine setting it all down. Papers, plans, appointments, everything. Leaving only a note, gone to the fields to be lovely. Be back when I'm through with blooming." Parker Palmer remarks that this poem, Camas Lilies, reminds him to value being more than he values being useful. He says, "So that even when I'm forced to lay down my work, I can retain my sense of personal worth. Put simply and plainly, I can still love myself," he says, "and that's a gift that many people need. If I can't give it to myself, how can I possibly give it to others. In the same way, when we give ourselves the gift of good boundaries, we model healthy boundaries for others, and that can be an enormously freeing experience and a freeing expression of love. Good boundaries are one expression of our ability to love ourselves. We honor our inherent worth and dignity when we regard as holy and sacred our right to say no. How different might the story of the giving tree have been if the tree at any time had simply said no. The same poem, Camas Lilies, also points us to a healthier grounding for a practice of generosity than obligation or self-justification. And this is in our sense of gratitude. The abundance of life, the beauty of life, our own unique and colorful blooming as sacred beings. This is all in the end a gift freely and lavishly given to us as our birthright. We have done nothing to earn it. It is natural as an act of joy and gratitude to want to participate in that abundance, to pass it on, to share in life's goodness, to celebrate life together. What gift can we bring to convey the joy of this day? We all have gifts to bring. We all can cultivate a generous and loving heart. As we enter the season of giving, may our generosity flow freely from a place of gratitude, honoring our loved ones, nurturing our families and our communities, even as we honor and nurture our own spirits and our own healthy boundaries. May it be so, and amen.